Researchers in the second pivotal study evaluating the safety and efficacy of avacincaptad pegol for the treatment of geographic atrophy have released one-year results. What did they find?
I'm Scott Kriswanis here with Greg Notestein, and this is New Retina Radio's coverage of the 2022 AAO annual meeting. New Retina Radio spoke with Dr. Arshad Khanani about the GATHER2 study findings. How did the study results compare to those in GATHER1, and might the company move forward with a regulatory filing? Stick with us to find out.
After years of having no safe and effective treatment for geographic atrophy, it feels as though retina may be on the cusp of a major change. 2 drugs for this indication have completed their pivotal clinical studies, both of which focus on complement pathway inhibition.
At this year's AAO meeting, Dr. Arshad Khanani presented data from the GATHER2 study, a pivotal phase 3 study assessing the safety and efficacy of avacincaptad pegol for the treatment of GA, and the second pivotal study to be completed for this drug. Avacincaptad pegol, as you'll recall, inhibits C5, which is partially responsible for inflammation and cell death in patients with GA.
And Dr. Khanani is with us today. He is the managing partner and director of clinical research at Sierra Eye Associates in Reno, Nevada. He is also a clinical associate professor at the University of Nevada, Reno School of Medicine. Dr. Khanani, thank you once again for joining us here on New Retina Radio.
Thank you, Greg and Scott, and it's a pleasure to be here.
GATHER2 enrolled 448 patients. Tell us how they were randomly assigned to treatment arms and what the treatments were.
So GATHER2 is a phase 3 study, as you mentioned, and it is the second pivotal looking at avacincaptad pegol in patients with geographic atrophy. It's an international randomized double-masked sham-controlled study. So we randomize patients in 1-to-1 either to receive avacincaptad pegol monthly in the first year till month 12, or to sham injections, also dosed monthly. And the primary endpoint was the mean rate of GA growth from baseline to month 12. But here we are using what's called a slope analysis for primary endpoint, and we use square root transformation data for this analysis.
Who exactly was enrolled in the study? What did these patients look like?
So these are patients with geographic atrophy. Really, the criteria were very consistent with the other complement inhibitor trials, except for a couple of differences. We enrolled patients that had GA lesions that did not have center point involvement. So we have seen that for patients with GA, if they don't have center point involvement, we may be able to show more differentiation. And number 2 is these GA lesions were within 1,500 microns from the foveal center.
Let's get to the good parts here. What did the researchers find at the primary endpoint, which was at month 12?
So the study met the pre-specified primary endpoint where patients treated with avacincaptad pegol had a GA growth reduction of 14% compared to sham. The p-value was statistically significant, and the trial met the primary endpoint with high statistical significance. So really, we met the primary endpoint, number 1. Number 2 is what we saw was the fact that we see a treatment effect early and it increases over time. So we are seeing the benefit that continues with more treatment in these patients.
What other efficacy data were observed?
So we also looked at mean change from baseline analysis utilizing observed data. This is exactly the same analysis that was done for the GATHER1 study. Again, this was also consistent with primary analysis. Here we saw a growth reduction of 17% compared to sham. And again, we saw the same thing we saw in primary analysis, where we saw a treatment effect that starts early and it increases over time.
The research team conducted a pre-specified analysis in some subgroups. Did any single population demonstrate a unique benefit?
So that's a really good question, because this is a new space, a new treatment, and we want to know, are there patients who benefit from this treatment versus patients who don't. So we had pre-specified subgroup analysis based on certain baseline characteristics like lesion size less than 4 disc area or greater than 4 disc area, visual acuity less than 50 or greater than 50, and some FAF characteristics, as well as age and gender. And what we found was the fact that any subgroup you looked at, there was benefit for patients with treated with avacincaptad pegol. And this was also consistent with what we saw in the GATHER1 study, where pre-specified subgroups had benefit from avacincaptad pegol. And the other thing we noticed in GATHER1 was that the benefit increased over time when we looked at 12-month data to 18-month data. So I think it appears that this treatment is benefiting all our patients with geographic atrophy.
Let's talk about GATHER1 and GATHER2 as a set. Can you tell us what we might be able to learn now that we have 2 complete data sets?
Absolutely. I think it's exciting to have the first program to actually have 2 studies that met the pre-specified primary endpoint. As you know, GATHER1 met the primary endpoint, and now we saw in GATHER2, we saw the pre-specified primary endpoint was also met. So avacincaptad pegol is the first investigational therapy in GA to achieve the 12-month pre-specified primary endpoint in 2 pivotal phase 3 studies. And in both studies, we have seen a treatment effect that starts early. So we are seeing a therapeutic benefit of avacincaptad pegol in these patients, and this increases over time. As you know, GATHER2 study also has a second year where patients will be re-randomized to either receive monthly or every other month avacincaptad pegol in the treatment arm, and then in the sham arm, we'll continue with sham injections. So we'll generate more long-term data, but it appears that for this disease, avacincaptad pegol and C5 inhibition can help our patients slow this down.
What should your colleagues expect when it comes to the next steps for avacincaptad pegol? Are we looking at an FDA filing? Are we going to wait for those 24-month data to come through? Do you have any information on that?
Yeah, so, we know that publicly the company has said that they plan to file early next year. So we hope that, the FDA accepts it, and then we have a FDA decision within the next year. One thing to highlight here, Scott and Greg, is the fact that there was also a safety presentation at AAO that was done, and there was no drug-related intraocular inflammation, no endophthalmitis, no ischemic optic neuropathy. So the safety profile for avacincaptad pegol is also very favorable. So I think we'll have the filing, and then we'll look forward to seeing the 24-month data at the end of next year.
All right. Well, it's going to be an exciting year. Dr. Khanani, thanks for joining us on New Retina Radio.
It's always a pleasure to speak to both of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. If you're in a podcast app, which you probably are, be sure to tap subscribe to get our latest episodes.
And please look out for our ongoing AAO 2022 coverage on New Retina Radio. We have a handful of episodes that will hit your feed in the coming weeks.